Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship and watched the huge alien vessel come closer through the big window. The ship was called the Liberty, and it belonged to Earth's defense fleet. The alien ship was 10 times bigger than his own ship, and it shined with a strange light that hurt his eyes to look at directly. This was the first time in 50 years that aliens had called humans to meet with them officially. Jake had been a captain for 12 years, and he had seen many strange things in space, but nothing like this. The alien ship looked like it was made of crystal and metal mixed together. It moved without making any sound and left no trail behind it. The size of it made Jake feel very small, and he could not help but think about how powerful these aliens must be. Admiral Lisa Carter's voice came through the radio from Earth Command. Her voice sounded worried, even though she tried to hide it. Jake knew Lisa well because they had worked together for many years before she got promoted to admiral. She was one of the smartest people he knew, and if she was worried, then there was good reason to be worried. "Jake, remember what we talked about before you left Earth?" Lisa said through the radio. "The future of all humans depends on how this meeting goes today. These aliens call themselves the Galactic Council, and they have been in charge of this part of space for more than 10,000 years. Every alien race that wants to be part of their group has to pay them something called tribute." Jake nodded, even though Lisa could not see him. He had read all the files about the Galactic Council during his trip to meet them. The Council controlled hundreds of different alien races, and they all had to follow the Council's rules. The Council said they protected these races from danger and helped them with technology and trade. But the files also showed that races who did not join the Council often disappeared or got destroyed. The Liberty moved closer to the Council's space station. The station was shaped like a huge ring, and it was bigger than any city on Earth. Jake could see thousands of small ships moving around the station like insects around a bright light. Some of the ships looked familiar from the pictures in Earth's files, but many others were completely new and strange. Jake's team stood with him on the bridge. Dr. Ben Taylor was their language expert, and he knew how to speak with many different alien races. Colonel Amy Brooks was their military advisor, and she always made sure they were safe. Both of them looked nervous but ready for whatever would happen next. "Captain, we are getting a signal from the station," said the communications officer. "They want us to dock at bay number 7. Jake gave the order to dock, and soon they felt a small bump as their ship connected to the station. The artificial gravity in the station was a little different from Earth's gravity, but not enough to cause problems. Jake and his team put on their dress uniforms and checked their translation devices one more time before leaving their ship. The corridors inside the station were amazing. The walls were made of some kind of metal that changed colors as they walked past. The ceiling was so high that Jake could barely see it, and there were floating lights that moved around like living things. But what impressed him most were the aliens walking through the corridors. Jake had seen pictures of aliens before, but seeing them in person was completely different. There were tall, thin aliens with blue skin and 4 arms. There were short, round aliens that rolled instead of walking. There were aliens that looked like they were made of rock, and others that seemed to be made of gas held together by some kind, a force field. All of them wore different kinds of clothing and carried different tools or weapons. Most of the aliens ignored Jake and his team as they walked through the corridors. A few stopped to stare at them with curiosity. Jake realized that humans were probably just as strange to these aliens as the aliens were to humans. The thought made him feel a little better about being so far from home. A robot guide led them through many corridors and up several levels until they reached the council chamber. When the huge doors opened, Jake felt his breath catch in his throat. The chamber was the most amazing thing he had ever seen. It was perfectly round, and the seats for the alien delegates went up in circles like the inside of a bowl. There were hundreds of different aliens sitting in the seats, and they all looked down at the center of the chamber where Jake and his team now stood. At the very top of the chamber were 3 huge geometric shapes that glowed with bright light. Jake realized these must be the High Arbiters that he had read about in the files. They were beings made of pure energy, and they had been leading the Galactic Council for thousands of years. The light they gave off made strange patterns on the walls and ceiling of the chamber. The translation field in the chamber made a humming sound, and Jake could feel it working on his brain. It was not painful, but it felt strange to know that aliens were changing his thoughts so he could understand their language. Dr. Taylor had explained how the technology worked, but experiencing it was very different from reading about it. High Arbiter. Zexathol began to speak, and Jake heard the words in perfect English even though he knew the being was not actually speaking English. The voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, and it had a quality that made Jake want to listen and obey. Humans of the planet called Earth, you have been called before this council to receive your tribute assessment, the High Arbiter said. For 10,000 years, this council has provided protection and guidance to all races in this galaxy. In return for our protection, your species will provide the following tribute each year. Jake felt his heart start to beat faster. This was the moment they had all been preparing for. Everything that happened next would determine the future of humanity. You will provide 50% of your military vessels to serve in the council. Fleet, Zexthul continued. You will provide 30% of your planetary resources, including metals, food, and energy sources. You will also provide 1 million of your people each year to work in the outer colonies where they are needed. The chamber became completely silent. Jake could hear his own heartbeat, and he could feel his team becoming tense beside him. The tribute demands were not a request for help or cooperation. They were the terms of complete surrender. The Council wanted to take half of Earth's military power, a third of their resources, and 1 million people every year to use as slave labor. Jake looked around the chamber at all the alien delegates. Now he understood why so many of them looked tired and defeated. They had all been through the same process. They had all been forced to give up their independence and freedom to survive. The Galactic Council was not a partnership of equals. It was an empire built on fear and submission. Jake and his team walked back to their ship in complete silence. The weight of what they had just heard pressed down on them like a heavy stone. Nobody spoke until they were safely inside the Liberty, and the doors had closed behind them. Then they waited until they were in the conference room before anyone said a word. Colonel Amy Brooks was the first to break the silence, and her voice was filled with anger that she was trying very hard to control. She walked back and forth across the small room, and her hands were closed into tight fists. Jake had never seen her this upset before, and it worried him because Amy was always calm even in dangerous situations. Half of our fleet, Amy said, and her voice shook a little. They want us to give them half of all our ships that protect Earth, and they want 1 million people every year to work as slaves in their colonies. They are not even trying to pretend that this is anything other than complete surrender. Dr. Ben. Taylor was sitting at the table looking at his computer screen. He had been downloading information from the Council's database during their meeting, and now he was studying what he had found. The more he read, the more worried he looked. Jake sat down across from him and waited for Ben to share what he was learning. I have been looking at the tribute records for other alien races, Ben said without looking up from his screen. The pattern is the same for every single species that has joined the Council. They all start by paying tribute, and then gradually, they lose more and more of their independence until they become completely controlled by the Council. Ben turned his screen so Jake and Amy could see the information he had found. There were hundreds of alien races listed, and each one showed the same sad story. The Cathari had once been proud warriors with a strong military and their own government. Now they served as soldiers in council wars and had no say in how their own planet was run. The Vorthak had been master engineers who built amazing machines and structures. Now they worked in huge factories building ships for the Council, and most of them had never seen their home planet since they were taken away as children. Look at this data about the Morden, Ben continued, and pointed to another entry on his screen. They were artists and philosophers who created beautiful music and literature. The Council decided their creativity was not useful, so they were assigned to work in mining operations. Their entire culture was destroyed in less than 50 years. Jake felt sick as he read through the records. Every race had the same story. They had all started as free peoples with their own governments and cultures and dreams. The Council had promised them protection and prosperity in exchange for tribute. But once they agreed to pay tribute, they found themselves trapped in a system that slowly took everything away from them. Amy stopped walking and turned to face Jake. "What about fighting back?" she asked. "We have seen their technology and their weapons. They are definitely more advanced than us, but maybe we could find a way to resist them." Ben shook his head and pulled up another section of data. "I found records of species that tried to fight the Council. The results were always the same. The Mortok rebellion lasted for 3 years and they fought very bravely. The Council's response was to destroy their entire home planet with a weapon that turned the whole world into melted glass. Nothing survived. The screen showed pictures of what had once been the Mortok homeworld. Where there had once been cities and forests and oceans, there was now just a ball of smooth black glass floating in space. Jake stared at the image and tried to imagine Earth looking like that. He thought about all the people he knew and loved, and all the places he had visited. The idea of it all being destroyed was too horrible to accept. The Council does not just defeat resistance, Ben continued. They make examples out of anyone who tries to fight them. They want every other race to see what happens when you say no to their demands. Fear is one of their most powerful weapons. Jake stood up and walked to the window where he could see the stars. Somewhere out there was Earth with its blue oceans and white clouds and billions of people who had no idea that their freedom was about to be taken away. Earth had always been humanity's home and sanctuary. It was the place where humans had learned to walk upright and use tools and build cities and reach for the stars. The thought of giving it up to alien masters made Jake feel angry and sick at the same time. There has to be another choice, Jake said quietly, but with determination in his voice. Humanity has faced impossible situations before. We survived ice ages and plagues and wars that nearly destroyed us. We figured out how to grow food and build machines and fly to other planets. Every time someone said something was impossible, we found a way to do it anyway. Amy nodded, and some of the anger left her face. Jake is right. Humans are good at finding solutions when everything looks hopeless. Maybe we are missing something important about this situation. Ben looked up from his computer with a thoughtful expression. I have been reading through thousands of years of Council history. There are some gaps in their records that do not make sense. It looks like they have tried to erase certain information, but they did not do a perfect job. Jake turned away from the window and looked at Ben with interest. What kind of gaps? References to a species that the Council calls the Old Ones, Ben explained. The records mention them several times, but then suddenly all information about them stops. There is no record of them being destroyed or joining the Council or anything else. They just disappear from the database completely. Amy leaned forward across the table. Could they have escaped somehow? Ben shrugged. That is what I am trying to figure out. The few references I can find suggest that the Old Ones were offered the same tribute demands that we just received. But then something happened that made the Council stop pursuing them. The records are very careful not to explain what that something was. Jake felt a spark of hope for the first time since leaving the Council chamber. How long would it take you to trace their path through the galaxy and find out what happened to them? Ben thought for a moment while he calculated the time needed for such a search. With the Liberty sensors and the access we still have to the Council database, maybe 18 hours if we work without stopping. Jake made his decision without hesitation. Do it. Find them. If there is even a small chance that they found a way to escape the Council, then we need to learn how they did it. Ben nodded and immediately began working on his computer to start the search. Amy began planning the route they would need to take to follow the trail of the Old Ones. Jake sent a message to Admiral Carter explaining that they needed more time before giving their answer to the Council. As the Liberty prepared to leave the Council station, Jake looked back at the huge ring-shaped structure one more time. Somewhere in that station were hundreds of alien delegates who had all faced the same impossible choice that humanity now faced. Most of them had chosen to submit and pay tribute. A few had chosen to fight and been destroyed. But maybe, just maybe, there was a third option that nobody else had discovered yet. Dr. Ben Taylor had not slept for 16 hours, but his eyes were bright with excitement as he stared at his computer screen. The Liberty was moving through space, following a trail that was thousands of years old, and Ben was using every piece of technology on the ship to track down clues about the mysterious Old Ones. Jake and Amy had taken turns bringing him food and coffee, but Ben barely noticed them because he was so focused on his work. The trail had been very difficult to follow, at first. The Old Ones had been careful to hide their path, and the Council had tried to erase all records of them. But Ben was very good at finding hidden information. and the Liberty's sensors were some of the most advanced that Earth had ever built. Slowly, piece by piece, he was putting together the story of what had happened thousands of years ago. "I found something important," Ben called out suddenly, and his voice was so excited that Jake and Amy came running to see what he had discovered. Ben's hands were shaking a little as he pointed at his screen. The old ones did not just disappear. They left the galaxy completely, and I think I know where they went. Jake looked at the data on Ben's screen, but most of it was in alien languages that he could not read. "What exactly did you find?" Ben pulled up a star map that showed their current location and a path leading toward the edge of the galaxy. "I have been tracking energy signatures and residual ion trails from their ships. The old ones had very advanced technology that left traces even after all this time. They traveled to a region that the Council marks as completely uninhabitable." Amy studied the map and frowned. "Why would they go to a place where nothing can live?" "That is exactly what I wondered," Ben replied. "So I looked deeper into the Council's records about that region. They claim it is full of dangerous radiation and unstable stars that make it impossible for any life to survive there. But their own sensor data does not match what they say in their official reports." Ben brought up another screen that showed scientific measurements from the edge of the galaxy. The numbers were complicated, but Jake could see that something did not make sense. The Council's public report said the region was deadly, but their private sensor readings showed that it was actually quite safe for most forms of life. "They lied about it," Jake said as he realized what Ben was showing them. "The Council told everyone that region was dangerous so nobody would go there and discover the old ones." Ben nodded eagerly. "Exactly. And there is more. I found fragments of communication records that suggest the old ones did not just run away from the Council. They did something that forced the Council to let them leave peacefully." Amy leaned closer to look at the screen. "What could possibly force the Council to let anyone go? They have the most powerful military in the galaxy." Ben pulled up the last piece of information he had found, and his expression became very serious. "According to what I could piece together from the damaged records, the old ones gave a single-word response to the Council's tribute demands. Whatever that word was, it somehow protected them from any retaliation and forced the Council to honor their choice to leave." Jake felt his heart start beating faster. "A single word? What word could have that much power?" "That is what we need to find out," Ben said. "Because if we can discover what they said, it might be humanity's only chance to avoid the same fate as all the other species under Council control." Jake looked at the star map again and calculated how long it would take them to reach the edge of the galaxy. It was a long journey, and they were already running out of time before they had to give the Council their answer. But this was the first real hope they had found since the whole crisis began. "How long to get there?" Jake asked. Ben checked his calculations. "At maximum speed, about 14 hours. But Captain, we need to understand that this is a huge risk. If the old ones are not there, or if they refuse to help us, we will have used up all our time and we will still have no answer for the Council." Amy crossed her arms and looked determined. "It is a risk we have to take. The alternative is to surrender our freedom without even trying to find another way." Jake made his decision quickly because he knew that thinking about it too long would just make him worry about all the things that could go wrong. "Set course for the edge of the galaxy, maximum speed." The Liberty turned and accelerated toward the unknown region. Jake sent a message to Admiral Carter explaining that they were following a lead that might provide a solution, but he could not give her any details yet. He knew that Lisa would be worried and frustrated, but there was no choice except to trust that they were doing the right thing. As they traveled through space, Ben continued to analyze the data he had collected. He found more clues about the old ones and their technology, but he still could not figure out what word they had spoken to the Council. The mystery became more puzzling the more he learned about it. "Look at this," Ben said after several hours of quiet work. "The Council's own records show that they were terrified of the old ones after they spoke that word. The High Arbiters called emergency meetings and sent messages to all their military commanders. Something about that single word shook the foundation of their entire empire." Jake tried to imagine what kind of word could have such a powerful effect on beings who had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. The Council had destroyed entire planets and enslaved hundreds of species. They had technology that could turn stars into weapons and ships that could travel faster than light. What word could possibly threaten such power? Amy had been thinking about the same question. Maybe it was not the word itself, but what the word represented. The Council's power comes from fear and the belief that resistance is impossible. If someone found a way to break that belief, then their whole system would be in danger. Ben looked up from his screen with a thoughtful expression. That actually makes sense. Every species that pays tribute does so because they believe they have no other choice. But if one species proves that choice is possible, then others might start to question the system too. Jake stared out at the stars as they rushed past the Liberty at incredible speed. Somewhere ahead of them might be the answer to humanity's problem. The old ones had found a way to say no to the Council and survive. If humans could learn their secret, then maybe Earth could remain free. The ship's computer announced that they were approaching the edge of the galaxy. Jake called his crew to battle stations even though they did not expect to fight anyone. They had no idea what they would find in the region that the Council claimed was uninhabitable. What they discovered there would change everything they thought they knew about the galaxy and the nature of freedom itself. The Liberty's sensors detected the massive space station long before they could see it with their eyes. It was floating in the empty space near a dying red star that gave off just enough light to see by. The station was clearly very old, but it was still working and sending out signals that showed it had power and life support systems running. Jake had never seen anything like it in all his years of space travel. The station was enormous and shaped like a complex geometric pattern that seemed to shift and change as they got closer to it. The metal it was made from was different from anything Jake had seen before, and it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Strange energy patterns moved across its surface like slow lightning, and the whole structure hummed with power that their instruments could barely measure. As the Liberty approached the station, they received a transmission that made everyone on the bridge stop what they were doing and stare at each other in amazement. The message came through in perfect English even though they were thousands of light years away from Earth and had never told anyone where they were going. Human vessel. Liberty, you are welcome here, the voice said, and it sounded almost human, but with subtle differences that suggested the speaker had evolved separately for a very long time. We have been waiting for your arrival. Please dock at Bay 7 and prepare to meet with Elder Kane. Jake looked at Dr. Ben Taylor and Colonel Amy Brooks and saw his own surprise reflected in their faces. How could these beings possibly know their language or the name of their ship? And how could they have been waiting for them when Jake's own crew had only decided to come here a few hours ago? Should we dock with them? Amy asked, and her hand moved unconsciously toward her weapon. Her military training made her suspicious of any situation that seemed too convenient or too easy. Ben was already scanning the station with every sensor the Liberty had available. I am not detecting any weapon systems or signs of hostile intent. The station appears to be mainly research facilities and living quarters. But Captain, the technology level here is far beyond anything we have seen before. They could probably destroy us without us even knowing how they did it. Jake made his decision based on the fact that they had come too far to turn back now. If these were really the old ones, then they represented humanity's only hope of finding an alternative to submission or destruction. Take us to Bay 7, but keep all our systems ready in case we need to leave quickly. The docking bay was large enough to hold 10 ships the size of the Liberty. As they landed, Jake could see that the bay was designed for many different types of spacecraft from various alien species. Some of the docking cradles were clearly built for ships that were very different from human designs. This suggested that the old ones had been in contact with many other races over the centuries. A single figure was waiting for them as they left their ship. The being looked remarkably human at first glance, but as they got closer, Jake could see the differences. The person was taller than most humans, and his skin had a slight metallic sheen to it. His eyes were larger than normal human eyes, and they seemed to glow with their own inner light. But his face was kind, and his smile was warm and welcoming. I am Elder Kane, the being said as he approached them. I speak for my people in greeting you. We have watched humanity's development for many years, and we have been hoping that someone like you would eventually find us. Jake stepped forward and tried to hide his amazement at meeting a member of the legendary Old Ones. "I am Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth ship Liberty. We have come here because we need help. The Galactic Council has demanded tribute from humanity, and we are looking for an alternative to submission or destruction." Elder Kane's expression became serious and sympathetic. "Yes, we know about the Council's demands. We have been monitoring their communications, and we saw the meeting, where they presented their terms to you. The tribute they want from humanity is the same as what they demanded from us thousands of years ago." Amy stepped closer, and her voice was urgent with the need to know their options. "Our research suggests that your people found a way to refuse the Council and survive. We need to know how you did it because humanity will not accept slavery." Elder Kane gestured for them to follow him as he began walking toward the interior of the station. "Come with me and I will show you our history and explain what we learned about the true nature of the Council's power. But first you must understand that the choice we made came with a very high price." They walked through corridors that were filled with strange art and technology that Jake could not begin to understand. The walls showed images of planets and stars and alien beings that changed and moved like living paintings. The air smelled of flowers and metal, and something else that reminded Jake of the ocean back on Earth. Elder Kane led them to a large room that contained what appeared to be a complete history of his people's encounter with the Galactic Council. Holographic displays showed scenes of ancient meetings and battles and the eventual exodus of the Old Ones from the main galaxy. But what interested Jake most was a simple recording of an Old One speaking to the Council thousands of years ago. "This is the moment that changed everything," Elder Kane explained as he activated the recording. "When the Council demanded tribute from us, we had already studied their methods and their psychology for many years. We discovered that their power is not really based on their superior technology or their military strength." The holographic display showed an Old One standing before the Council in the same chamber where Jake had been just a few days earlier. The Council members looked exactly the same as they did now, which suggested that they were either immortal or replaced themselves with identical copies over the centuries. "The Council's power comes from the belief that resistance is futile," Elder Kane continued. "Every species that pays tribute does so because they have been convinced that they have no other choice. But choice always exists for those who are willing to pay the price for freedom." Jake watched as the Old One in the recording faced the High Arbiters and their demand for tribute. When the moment came for the response, Jake leaned forward eagerly to hear the word that had changed galactic history. The Old One looked directly at the High Arbiters and spoke a single word with absolute conviction and no trace of fear or doubt in his voice. The word was simple and clear and powerful beyond measure. "No." Elder Kane paused the recording and turned to face Jake and his team. "That is the word that broke the Council's power over us. A simple, absolute refusal without qualification or negotiation or fear. But you must understand that saying this word means accepting complete isolation from the Council's protection and technology and trade networks." Ben looked confused. "But why would one word have such power over beings who rule the entire galaxy?" Elder Kane smiled and his eyes glowed brighter. "Because the Council's rule is built on consent, given through fear. When a species says no and truly means it with their whole heart and soul, it reminds everyone in the galaxy that freedom is always possible for those brave enough to choose it." Jake stood in the Council chamber once again, but this time everything was different. Behind him were not just Dr. Ben Taylor and Colonel Amy Brooks, but also holographic images of Earth's most important leaders who had voted to support humanity's decision. President Maria Rodriguez stood tall and confident, even though she was billions of miles away on Earth. UN Secretary General Peter Kim looked calm and determined, despite knowing that the future of humanity depended on what happened in the next few minutes. The massive chamber was filled with hundreds of alien delegates from every corner of the galaxy. Jake could see the same species he had noticed during his first visit, but now he looked at them with different eyes. He saw the Cathari, warriors who had once been proud and free but now served as soldiers for the Council. He saw the Vorthak engineers who had once built wonders for their own people, but now worked only to make the Council more powerful. He saw dozens of other races that had all made the same choice to trade their freedom for the promise of safety. "Hi," Arbiter Zexthul's energy form pulsed with the authority of 10,000 years of unchallenged rule. The geometric shape that contained the being's consciousness glowed brighter than usual, and the patterns of light it cast on the chamber walls seemed more aggressive and threatening than before. Jake could sense that the council leaders were not used to waiting for answers, and they did not like the delay that humanity had requested. Humans of the planet called Earth. Zexthul's voice boomed through the translation fields and reached every corner of the vast chamber. You have been given time to consider our generous offer of protection and guidance under the authority of the Galactic Council. What is your response to the tribute requirements that have been presented to your species? Jake looked around the chamber at the hundreds of alien faces that were all focused on him. Some looked curious about what the newest species would decide. Others looked sympathetic because they remembered making the same choice themselves long ago. A few looked hopeful, as if they were wondering whether humanity might find a different path than the one they had been forced to take. The chamber was completely silent as everyone waited for Jake's response. He thought about Earth with its blue oceans and green forests and billions of people who were living their lives without knowing that their freedom hung in the balance. He thought about children playing in parks and scientists working to cure diseases and artists creating beautiful music and literature. All of that would be lost if humanity accepted the Council's demands. He also thought about Elder Cain and the Old Ones who had chosen exile over submission thousands of years ago. They had given up everything familiar and comfortable to preserve their right to make their own choices. They had spent centuries building a new life at the edge of the galaxy, where they could be free, but they would always be alone. Jake knew that humanity faced the same choice now. They could accept the Council's protection and gradually lose everything that made them human. Or they could refuse and face an uncertain future, where they would have to survive on their own strength and courage. It was not an easy choice, but for Jake and for humanity, there was really only one answer they could give. When Jake spoke, his voice was clear and strong, and it carried to every corner of the chamber through the translation fields. He did not shout or make dramatic gestures. He simply said the word that would change humanity's destiny forever. No. The single word hung in the air like a physical force. For a moment, the entire chamber was frozen in shock, because none of the delegates had ever heard such a response to the Council's demands. Then the silence exploded into chaos as hundreds of alien voices began talking at once. Some delegates sounded frightened, while others sounded excited and a few sounded angry. High Arbiter Zexthul's energy form flared with what could only be rage, and the light it gave off became so bright that some delegates had to shield their eyes. You refuse the Council's protection? The High Arbiter demanded, and its voice thundered through the chamber, like an earthquake. You reject the authority that has maintained peace and order in this galaxy for 10,000 years? Jake looked directly at the High Arbiter, and his voice remained calm and steady. Yes. Humanity rejects your tribute demands, your protection, and your authority over our species. We choose to remain free. President Rodriguez's holographic image stepped forward, and her voice was strong and clear. The people of Earth have voted unanimously to support this decision. We will not trade our freedom for safety. We will not allow our children to grow up as slaves. We choose independence even if it means facing danger alone. High Arbiter Zexthul's form pulsed with fury. Then you choose extinction. No species can survive in this galaxy without the Council's protection. You will be destroyed by the first hostile force you encounter. Jake smiled, and in that smile was the confidence of a species that had survived ice ages and plagues and wars through nothing but determination and courage. We have been on our own for our entire history. We will take our chances. Secretary. General Kim's hologram spoke next, and his words were directed not just at the Council but at all the alien delegates in the chamber. We invite any species that values freedom over security to join us. The galaxy is big enough for those who choose independence over submission. The chamber erupted in even greater chaos as delegates began talking excitedly among themselves. Jake could see that some of them were looking at their neighbors with new expressions. For the first time in centuries, they were hearing that there might be an alternative to Council rule. High Arbiter Zexthul tried to restore order, but its voice was no longer as commanding as it had been before. Any species that follows humanity's path will face the same destruction. The Council's protection is not optional. But Jake was already walking toward the exit with his team and the holographic images of Earth's leaders. As they left the chamber, he could hear dozens of conversations, starting among the delegates. The word "no" was being repeated in many different alien languages, and for the first time in 10,000 years, the Council's absolute authority was being questioned. The Liberty departed from the Council station within an hour, carrying humanity's message to the galaxy. Behind them, the Council chamber continued to buzz with excited conversations as delegates from many species began to whisper about the possibility of freedom. The Cathari representative was talking quietly with the Vorthak delegate. The Morden survivors were meeting with representatives from 3 other enslaved species. For 10,000 years, the Galactic Council had ruled through fear and the belief that resistance was impossible. But humanity had proven that choice always existed for those brave enough to make it. The simple word "no" had shaken the foundation of the galaxy's oldest empire and reminded everyone that freedom was always possible for those willing to fight for it. 6 months later, 3 more species had followed humanity's example and chosen exile over submission. The Council's grip on the galaxy had begun to loosen, and in the outer regions a new alliance was forming between species that had chosen the difficult path of independence over the easy path of surrender.